In this tutorial, we'll illustrate how sketch carving can take a photo or a 3D model and create a V-carve toolpath that picks out the key parts of your source imagery. The results of using a bitmap is a more stylistic look than photo V-carving, and when used with 3D content, the 2D version is quicker to machine than its 3D counterpart, and in turn gives you another option when it comes to your investment in 3D content. A key thing to remember when cutting a sketch carving is that the best practices for V-carving and photo V-carving apply. A sharp V-bit, flat material and spoil board, and a contrasting finish will help ensure amazing results. Sketch carving can be used in combination with all of your other Toolpath strategies, and with its simple to use options, you'll soon see how flexible and powerful it can be, giving you new options for your projects and clients. As you can see, I've got a brand new instance of VCarve Desktop up and running. Now it's important to remember that sketch carving is available in VCarve Pro and Aspire both. Now to get started, we're going to go ahead and explore using a bitmap in your sketch carving toolpath, and then in a bit we'll look at using some 3D content. So to start out, we're going to create a new file. That's going to be a single-sided job. The width will be 10, the height will be 8. Our material thickness is going to go at 3/4 of an inch. Now we're going to be zeroing off our material surface. Now it's really important that when it comes to doing sketch carving that you follow the best practices of creating a good V-carving and a good photo V-carving. And those are: use a sharp bit, make sure your material is flat, your machine is true, and you've got a nice plan for a contrasting finish. And that will make all the difference in the world when it comes to getting a good result. So for right now, as I said, we're going to zero off the top of our material. Now our datum, we're going to put our datum in the center. Now we're going to change this later in our material setup, but for right now, we're going to leave it right there where it is. Now our modeling resolution, you may ask, why am I going to choose to use a very high modeling resolution when I'm using a 2D bitmap? Well, sketch carving actually will take a look at the amount of pixels that you have available in your job and use that to base how detailed of a sketch carving you can get. So the more pixels you have, the more detailed a sketch carving you'll end up having in the end. Now, you can decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just good to know that if you happen to use a low resolution, that you may end up not getting the detail that you want. For our material setup, we're going to drop this down and we're going to go up to use a solid color, and we're going to use white as our solid color, and we're going to click OK. Now the first thing we're going to need to do is to import in a bitmap. So let's go ahead and do that. Now I have a bitmap right here that I found on the internet. Now I cannot include this bitmap with this tutorial file, but sketch carving will work the same with any bitmap that you throw at it. So you probably have a bitmap hanging around that you can use. Now if your bitmap isn't quite right, we do have some built-in tools that will help you or give you some options when it comes to editing your bitmap. We've got our bitmap editor, which gives us some very basic options to change our contrast, our brightness, our gamma. We can invert it. That might give us a neat result. Turn it into a grayscale, and we can also add a border. That might be fun to kind of explore if you want to on your own. Let's close that down. We can also crop a bitmap if we need to, which would be nice as well. So you just never know, and it's good to know that we have those tools available there for you. So that's all we need to get started with our sketch carving. So let's jump over to our Toolpaths tab, and we'll flip over to our 3D view. Now right now, all we see is our white material there, but if we turn on our bitmap, you'll see it there. That looks really good. Happy with that. Now we're going to pretend that we're going to be cutting through a piece of dark material that we've painted the surface white. So that's why I've chosen this white material. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our material setup. And this is what we kind of hope you all do before you start cutting a job. This gives you a chance to actually go ahead and think a little bit about your machine setup and how your material is going to sit on your machine, along with making sure that you take a nice accurate measurement of the thickness of your material. In this case, it's going to be 0.75 an inch. We can choose where we're going to zero our machine. So now that we've got it on our machine, I've decided I'd like to move it to the bottom left. Again, we're going to zero off the top of our material. The model position doesn't matter because we don't have any 3D content to begin with. And our rapid Z gaps above our material and our home start position are safe and appropriate for my machine. So you're going to want to make sure you check that and make sure, again, it's safe and appropriate for your machine. And we'll click OK. Now let's jump right into the sketch carving toolpath. Now the first option we have is to either choose a bitmap or a 3D model. And again, like I mentioned, we'll look at 3D model in a bit. So let's select our bitmap. And we'll have a look at our start depth, which is going to be at 0 right now. We're going to start at the top of our material. And right now, we don't have a flat depth selected. Now, how do we actually know how deep our sketch carving is going to go? Well, we'll need to actually choose our machining limit boundary right now. It's set to select vectors, but if we go and choose select bitmap, you'll see right away in our 3D view that there's some green areas here that have been chosen by our software based on some other parameters that we haven't looked at yet that it thinks will give us a nice sketch carving. So let's look right down the top of that. And so all these little areas here, it's picked out. So now we can have a think about our flat depth. And why it's good to think about this at this point is that if you see any really wide green areas where your tool may end up cutting through your material, then this is where you can decide if you'd like to use that flat depth to stop it from going out the back of your material. Right now, I think we're pretty safe. It's pretty thick material, so it should be good. We're going to use a standard vanilla 60-degree V-bit for this. Again, we're using our bitmap boundary, but later on we'll look at a selected vector. You can't choose a selected level. Now you can do that when it comes to using 3D content, so we'll have a quick look at that then. The boundary offset can be used to extend the region that your sketch carving is applied. Now this is the real important setting right here, is your tracing parameters in your line thickness. Right now it's set to be 15. Closer to the thin end of our slider here. We can go ahead and type in 30 if we would like, and we can take a look at the updated preview, and you'll see that the green areas got quite a bit thicker, and this is where you're going to want to start to think about your flat depth. Or you can go even thinner by going down to 5 if you'd like to and see what you get, and you'll see you get nice fine detail. Now you can go ahead and combine two sketch carving toolpaths together. So you could go thick and then go thin, and that way you'll get some nice bold outlines with some nice fine detail. It's totally up to you. But for right now, I think we'll go back and we'll set this to be 13 because I kind of like that. We can also project this toolpath onto a 3D model. So if you feel like you like to project this onto something like a waving flag, or maybe you've got a sort of a beachy kind of scene that you want to project this onto, something very artistic, then you can go ahead and do that. That option is there for you. You also can use the vector selection if you'd like to. Right now we're going to avoid that, but we do have a dedicated video for that I'll put the link to that in our related videos below. And we're just going to leave that named sketch carving, and we can calculate that. The time it takes for your toolpath to calculate is totally dependent on how much detail you hope to get from your sketch carving, so it's good to keep that in mind. And there we have the actual wireframe of our job, and that looks pretty good. You can see all of the light blue sort of Z movements here, so it is going to do a little bit of up and down movement as it's cutting, but that's okay. Let's preview that visible toolpath and we'll see what we get. That looks pretty nice. And as I said to you before, I'm going to paint some dark material. So let's just make sure that this toolpath uses black, so we get a good idea of what this could look like when we're all finished. Yeah, I'm really quite happy with that. So let's close that down. Let's go back into our sketch carving toolpath for a minute, and we're going to explore this idea of using a selected vector. So looking at the results of this, I don't particularly like this hard line across the top or the hard line along the bottom. That's the actual boundary of our bitmap. If we could see it, there's actually one on the edge here and one on the other edge as well. But we want to see if we can avoid those. So let's bring up our design tab just for a second. Bring up our rectangle tool, and we're just going to hand draw in a quick rectangle here, just to kind of get rid of those lines. I like that, and I can use this handle here to change the radius of my rectangle if I like to. I'm happy with that, so let's close that down. Now we're going to choose to use a selected vector now. So with that vector selected, I'm going to turn back on my bitmaps, hold down my shift key, select that bitmap, and when I do, my sketch carving will be updated so that I only see what's inside of that vector, and you'll see that it stops at the edge of that. Okay, let's just take a second and recalculate that toolpath so we can get an idea of how using an extra vector will impact our sketch carving. Reset our preview, and we'll preview that visible toolpath. We get a much nicer result with these nice soft edges. That line is gone from the top and the bottom. I really like that a lot. Now let's take it one step further. and dive a little bit deeper into using this selected vector option. So if I turn back on my vectors in my 3D view and go over to my text tool, and I can just start typing right there. We're going to type in forever. That looks really good. Let's close that down. I'm happy with the size of that. Just select that and move it down into the water. Somewhere's around there. And we're going to create an offset vector. We're going to go outwards. A quarter inch will do the trick. Create that offset and we'll close this down. Now we're going to grab, turn back on our bitmaps to begin with. We need to be able to see that. So let's select that offset, hold down our shift key, grab this rectangle vector that we created. Keeping our shift key held down, we'll select the bitmap. So now if we go ahead and recalculate that toolpath, we're going to have this nice area where we can add some V carving in. And that might really add some customization to this and look really cool. So let's reset that. Let's preview that visible toolpath. Oh, that looks great. Let's close this down, turn back on our 2D vectors, select that forever text, create a very basic V carving toolpath. We're going to use a start depth of nothing or 0. We'll use that same V bit that we used. We're just going to skip everything else here and we'll calculate that. We'll preview that visible toolpath. We'll change that to be black. And there we have a lovely looking sketch carved job that, as I said, is totally customizable. You can use any bitmap you want, and it's a really stylized version of that beautiful beach scene. Okay, the next thing we can do now is have a look at how we can use a 3D model or a composite layout to create a nice looking sketch carving as well. To demonstrate that, we're going to need to open up a new file. So let's go over to File, and we'll go Open. And in our tutorial folder, we have a file called rooster_welcome.crv file. So we'll open that up. And we're going to say no to save our changes. Okay, once the file is loaded in, let's flip over to our 3D view. Now you'll see that our composite layout, or what you can see in the 3D view, is made up of a rooster and a banner. And if you look at our level dropdown, you'll see that there's a banner and a rooster. So it's important to remember that when you're sketch carving 3D content, it will sketch carve everything that you see in the 3D view with respect to 3D content. It's also good to remember that you can use content like I did here from the free models that you get with your Vectric software, or you can also use things from a company like Design and Make, or you can bring in content from other sources as well, including STL models if you want to sketch carve. So now let's have a look at our Toolpaths tab. And as always, we'll take a look at our material setup to start with. You'll see that our thickness of our material is 3/4 of an inch. Our datum currently right now is set to the center, but let's move it down to the bottom left-hand corner, and we'll just reposition our model here. And we're going to zero off our material surface. Now, even though we are creating a sketch carved toolpath based on 3D content, keep in mind that it is a 2.5D carving. So we're going to want to follow all the best practices for creating a V-carve toolpath or a photo V-carve toolpath, which again is a sharp bit. You have flat material, your machine is true, and you've got a good idea of how you're going to finish this with a contrasting finish. So we're going to set our 0 to the top. Our model position, now even though we are creating a 2.5D toolpath, it's really important to remember that we need to fit our model or our composite layout into our material thickness. The software at this point does not know that we intend on making a sketch carved toolpath. So in my case, the model thickness is 0.6239 of an inch, and my material thickness is 3/4 of an inch. So it will fit in there perfectly without any problem at all. If you do have an issue and there's an error here that says that your material or your model is thicker than your material, then you can go in here and set your model thickness to fit inside of that material. So you just need to type in a new height for that, press apply, and we'll Go ahead and size the Z height of your model to fit with inside that dimension that you've stated, and then it should fit nicely into your material. Our rapid Z gaps above our material and our home and start position are safe and appropriate for my machine, so I'm just going to go and click OK. So let's jump right into the Sketch Carve toolpath, and you'll notice at the top of this I've got 3D model selected, and you can see some of the sketch carved areas already in our 3D view highlighted in green. That's because I've chosen down here the machining limit boundary is model boundary. If I don't see anything, it's probably because I have selected vector chosen and I don't have a vector selected, so you're not going to be able to see anything. So we'll go back to model boundary for now. My start depth is going to be at 0. And again, like with the sketch carving of a bitmap, you're probably not going to want to put a flat depth in there unless you see some really wide green areas here where you fear that maybe your tool is going to cut through your material or cut too deep. For right now, I think I'm totally fine, so I'll leave that the way it is. I'm going to use that same vanilla V-bit that I had from before. It's a 60-degree V-bit, which should work perfect. Now, as I said, we can choose our machining limit boundary by our model boundary, by a selected vector, which is really great if we want to only sketch carve a certain piece of our 3D content or our composite model, or I can use a selected level. So if I have a bunch of different levels in my job and I want to only sketch carve one of the levels, then I can choose that from here. We can use that boundary offset if we'd like to, and that's only if we want to extend the region that our sketch carving is applied. Right now I just wanted to stay within the actual area that it's chosen, so that's perfect. And then there's the tracing parameters. Again, this is probably the most important part of this all, where we can use the slider to move up to get a really thick, less detailed sketch carving, or I can go down to be really fine and get lots of detail. Now keep in mind that, again, like the bitmap sketch carving, you could create a very bold sketch carve toolpath and a really fine sketch carve toolpath and then run them after each other, and you might get a really interesting result. And you could definitely preview that in our 3D toolpath preview so you can see what you get. So I highly suggest that you play around with that a little bit to see what results you may come up with. You can also go ahead and project this sketch carving onto your 3D model. So let's say you wanted to go ahead and cut this rooster and banner as a 3D thing, and then you wanted to project some sketch carving over top of it, maybe to highlight some details. Another great way to play around with your sketch carving toolpath. We can use our vector selector if we'd like to, but we're going to leave it at manual right now. We've got a great video for that, which I will link to in the related videos section, and we're just going to call this sketch carving, and we can calculate that. You'll see we've got a nice looking wireframe of that. So if we preview that visible toolpath, you'll see that it looks quite nice. Up here in my machined area color, I've got my global fill to black, but let's turn my toolpath color to black. That way, in case maybe I want to add some text in, which I may enamel a different color, maybe I'll paint a different color, then I can preview that if I'd like to. But for right now, we'll just go with that. And that looks pretty nice. I'm quite happy with that. Okay, let's close this down now. Now, the next thing I want to do is put that text on that banner. So let's turn back on our vectors, and I'll select that text. And we'll just create a very basic V-carve toolpath. We'll start with our start depth at 0. I'm going to use that same 60-degree V-bit. I'm going to leave everything alone here. I'm not going to project it onto my 3D model. Typically I would if I was cutting a 3D thing, but I'm not. And then we'll just leave it as V-carving the name, and we can calculate that. And we'll preview that visible toolpath. And then we can color that. Maybe we'll color that orange. That'd be kind of nice if I painted that orange. Now, the last thing I want to do is to add a nice bold object line around this. I think it looks nice as it is, but if I had a nice bold line around this, I think it would really make it pop. So to do that, I'm going to close down my toolpath preview. So I'm going to go ahead and select these two components, so the rooster and the ribbon, bring up my design tab, and we'll get an outline of that 3D content. And if I turn back on my vectors in my 3D view, you'll see there's actually an outline here that I can use around the whole thing. If you can't quite see that, you can look at your 2D view and you'll see that it's right there for me. Let's go back to my 3D view. I'm going to create a profile toolpath. We're going to start depth at 0, and we'll go down just a little tiny bit, not too much. I should make it 125. And we'll select not an end mill. We're going to select a 1¼ end mill. We'll select a 1/16 end mill. Select that. We're going to go cut outside that line. And that all looks fine. We can hide our advanced toolpath options. We don't need all that other stuff. That looks good. And we're just going to go down a little bit. So let's calculate that. We can preview that visible toolpath. Then we can color that black. And you'll see that we get a really nice now object line around that rooster. So I could cut that. I could finish it nicely with some dark sort of stain, and then I could go back in, I could enamel, or I could paint the welcome text in. And I think that would make a really nice sign in the end. A great alternative to a 3D version. Using the sketch carving strategy with your photos is a great alternative to photo V carving, and with its ability to give you another option for your 3D content, it can't be underestimated. This feature, when combined with all the other tools in your software, will up your game, and the possibilities are nearly endless.